Okay, everyone, we're live here, July 19th, 2019. We're just leaving court a little bit early. The prosecution came within a hair here at the Bijan Kian Mike Flynn trial, came within a hair of having this case thrown out and dismissed. The judge, there was a Rule 29 motion, which basically says, the judge, you can't let this go to a jury if the jury needs to speculate. And the judge reserved judgment on that, so it's going to, the prosecution rested, the defense has started. The first lawyer is Robert Kelly, the attorney for Flynn-Intel Group. An interesting story there with Robert Kelly. He says himself that he started a firm with 3 other CIA guys in 2016. Interesting background as well. He said he also was a Foreign Service officer after being in the Army in a rifle company, and usually the Foreign Service officers were OSS type agents. So he also then goes into our favorite Senate Armed Self-Services Committee for a number of years, about 20 years. So right from the get-go, the first witness the defense produces is right in keeping with everybody else we've seen, either ex-FBI or somehow involved with lobbying on Capitol Hill for the military industrial complex, let's say. And so I asked the lead agent, by the lead FBI agent was probably the most interesting. The lead FBI agent is a guy named Brian Alfredo. Now you have to remember the whole context here. This is a foreign interference in an election. We've had 3 years of wall-to-wall coverage about that. We have Flynn probably, but not provably, under surveillance at that time in December of 2015 with a Title I FISA. Title I FISA meaning all texts and all emails to foreign leaders like Kislyak. We know he's talking to Kislyak before he goes to the meeting with Putin. And then you get 2 hops, that there's a 2-hop rule, so you get your friends involved and then you get your friends' friends. So we know that we're seeing the text messages. We know that the CIA is concerned enough to send John Brennan over to do a London meeting. We know that there's a lot of stuff going on with Hillary's emails in London. A lot of people in the British intelligence and US FBI and Department of Justice, like Zaid Ahmad and Rob Mueller's personal secretary, a lot of different people in the Ministry of Defense that George Papadopoulos is meeting with, in addition to meeting with Alexander Downer, who was the chief negotiator for Cyprus when they were kind of dividing up the oil fields and doing the diplomatic agreements for the East Med pipeline in this Leviathan oil field. So he's meeting with a lot of key people. Remember, George Papadopoulos has 5 or 6 years with the Hudson Institute and doing these energy conferences. And that's the basin. The other side, that's the Greek side of the equation. On the other side of Cyprus is the Turkish side. That's the people we're dealing with. The Turkish energy minister is involved in this big meeting, which is the son-in-law of Erdogan, on September the 19th at this big meeting with Erdogan's foreign minister, a guy called MC, and then, of course, Mike Flynn, and this guy named Brian McCauley, also an ex-FBI agent. Also, Brian McCauley was involved in Hillary Clinton's email scandal. He's involved with dealing directly with Hillary Clinton's second, as far as classifying and declassifying Hillary's emails, with Patrick Kennedy, asking for 4 more agents. I don't know if Brian Alfredo was one of those 4 agents, but in the quid pro quo, but the Brian McCauley is directly involved and admits to doing a quid pro quo of getting 4 new agents for Iraq in exchange for declassifying and up-classifying certain emails for Hillary Clinton. So it's amazing to me that these people are so involved in the kind of exoneration of Hillary Clinton are also the same people involved in this case here today. You think the FBI only had 3 officers. One was Peter Strzok, another one being Brian Alfredo, and another one being Brian McCauley. But 2 of them have testified here in this trial already. Now, Brian Alfredo's got an interesting background, and the reason why I said I think he might have been one of the 4 agents is because of his background with the Air Force and the fact that he's still active duty. He didn't join the FBI until 2012. And this case starts with what they call the green light email, where he first gets this inkling that a foreign power is involved in getting involved in the US election on August 5th. They call it the green light email. Now, if you remember, if you count back 5 days from there, his other friend, again, of the only 3 agents that seem to be in the FBI anymore, Brian McCauley, and of course Brian Alfredo, and then of course Peter Strzok, 5 days before, a formal inquiry was opened by the FBI in the Flynn case. So with the Russia hacking, Russia tampering. So to me, it's amazing. You've got all these folks involved in the Russia investigation, literally on Capitol Hill, literally in the same office. We have all the text messages going back and forth about the insurance policy with Lisa Page and Peter Strzok. Sort of the tale of 2 investigations, really. And I don't know how many agents end up being on that, but obviously there's John Carlin doing the national security letters. There's Laufman, who's involved, the lawyer who's getting all the FISAs done. There's lots of different agents have testified in that case. But here's a relatively newbie guy here, and hasn't been with a very low-level guy in the FBI, who's involved in this Flynn case. Now remember, it's the counterintelligence division of the FBI is investigating Flynn on July 30th. I believe when the case finally unfolds, you'll find all the way back to December 2015, a Title I FISA warrant was given to intercept his phone calls to Kislyak. So in the same office, we might have had 6 months of text messages and 6 months of emails that this agent here, 6 days later, his inquiry gets opened. 6 days later, he could have collaborated. Brian Alfredo could have shared his Alfredo, and Strzok could have shared his strokes. You know, use a few of the strokes to share the Alfredo, right? They could have collaborated, but for some reason, Alfredo doesn't share his strokes, or shares strokes and share his strokes with Alfredo. They seem to be in 2 different worlds, but they're both investigating the same person, which is Mike Flynn. Huh. That's interesting. Now, when is the first FISA that we know about? When is the first FISA we know about in this case that the government has admitted to? We know there's a FISA for Mike Flynn. Are they trying to bury the FISA that actually started this whole case off in December of 2015? Are they trying to say the FISA with Flynn started here on August 15th, or August 5th, excuse me, when the green light happened? Are they trying to construct a parallel universe here, a parallel construction, to say, oh, we didn't start the Flynn FISA back when he was talking to Kislyak. We didn't start it when he was at the dinner with Putin in December of 2015. We didn't start it when Nellie Orr got the $44,000 check. We didn't start it when Deripaska came in and had all the meetings with Bruce Orr. We didn't start it when all the go-betweens, when Deripaska's lawyer, who seems to be the bagman for this operation, Adam Waldman, is making all these moves all around Capitol Hill. No, it's probably happened over here more, like in the summertime. That's when the Flynn FISA happened. I find it difficult to believe that you would give, if you already had a counterintelligence investigation running on Michael Flynn, and had, no matter when they opened it, if they opened it in December 2015, March of 2016, when they brought Carter Page down, who was also under a FISA at that time, or a UCE agreement, undercover employee agreement, when he came down from New York in March, or even if they waited as late as July to start the investigation on Mike Flynn, I find it hard to believe that another FBI agent 6 days later would open an investigation and you wouldn't tell him about it. You wouldn't corroborate evidence. Doesn't make sense to me. It's the big flaw in the ointment here. And then the other thing adds to it. He says he's active military. He says he's an active C-130 pilot. To me, given the fact that Brian McCauley started out testimony yesterday, 2 other career FBI, NCIS, usually when I see FBI and then I see NCIS, the next thing I think is CIA Maritime Data Services. I think of covert weapons going out in containers. I think the diplomats bring bring things in with their diplomatic status in the "don't touch my bags if you please" in the diplomatic pouches. That's a different substance. I'm saying the military guys are involved in the shipping of the weapons, okay? To me, what it sounds like is, hey, I'm gonna put a team together here, a school play, if you will, and I'm gonna have a bunch of pilots for the State Department. If you give me pilots, if you give me, if I do a quid pro quo with you, if I'm Brian McCauley, again, this is the person who starts the green light email on August 5th that kicks the whole investigation off. I find that interesting too. I find it interesting that Brian McCauley, who's classifying and declassifying emails for Hillary Clinton one day, and then the next day, he's leaving the FBI and then starting Flynn Intel Group, a fig. Is that a fig for the operations that we're currently doing? We don't know. But that guy, Brian McCauley, is meeting with Bijan Kian, is meeting with Mike Flynn. They're in Flynn Intel Group together. There's another guy, Robert Kelly, who's their lawyer, who's been in the Senate Intelligence Committee and House Foreign Affairs Committee for 20 years. He admits he started with 4 CIA guys. He says he started with Wilmer Mortensen in San Francisco. I believe that's the same firm that Bruce Orr started with and Bob Mueller started with. It was an immigration firm to get people in the West Coast into California in the 70s, and it turned into, in the late 90s, Wilmer Hale doing the same thing, bringing in Pakistani hackers into Washington, D.C., Bob Mueller's famous company before, obviously, 9/11 occurs. So it's a packed lineup here. If you liked, intelligence officers testifying, you've got it. They're all here. Now, Brian McCauley, again, out of the whole universe of FBI agents that can do the Project Confidence, out of the whole universe, he's the guy who kicks it off, right? And they have this meeting at the hotel September 19th. 2 foreign ministers, they hardly say anything. It's a 25-minute meeting. Bijan Kian hardly talks. Brian McCauley makes this presentation. The presentation is basically, we're going to get Gulen. We're going to present a whole bunch of information. And at the end of this rainbow, we're going to have a 60-minute video, which is going to, maybe launch a whole bunch of investigations about Feta Gulen, who I say is the drug front for this whole operation. We have intervening testimony by a guy named Kordovich, who owns a company called Sphere Consulting. I know it gets complicated, but just think of it as CIA cutout and you'll get it. He's a guy who's selling influence in a nice way, I guess is the way to say it. He's his sphere of influence. You've heard of spheres of influence. Well, his sphere of influence is Capitol Hill. His sphere of influence, Kordovich's sphere of influence on Capitol Hill is it's so spherical and such a sphere of influence that they call him actually the Pope of DC. Not my nickname for Kordovich, but apparently if you want to get covert weapons shipped anywhere, we'll do it through Covington Burling, and you better start with Kordovich's firm to grease the right palms. I don't mean to say it that way, but I'm saying that this is the same firm, Covington Burling, that did Fast and Furious. They did Zero Footprint. They did Timber Sycamore. They do all these covert weapons shipment programs. And it always seems to start off with having someone's sphere of influence. Now, I'm not saying Kordovich is taking bribes. He's registered under the FARA. He told the court, as he testified, remember, he's the company that Flynn Intel Group hires to kick this whole thing off, Kordovich. But it works. They have the meeting with Kordovich. They sign they sign the contract. They send him the $40,000, and the wheels start turning. Before this whole story is over with, Kordovich's team at Sphere Marketing is going to go to the Turkish embassy and make a full presentation for a $4 million piece of business to smear Gulen. So you can see the numbers are growing and rising here. There's still some intrigue. The trial is still going on, but to me it looks like a bunch of again, I only want to say it's compartmentalized. A bunch of old military guys, military intelligence guys, whether they have an FBI hat or a Navy intel hat, doing what they always did, because they know how to do covert weapons. They know how to do containers. So that's the metadata. The metadata looks like a bunch of guys who were in military intelligence, especially Navy intelligence, that were in that business and know that business. And the people who are involved here, as far as the folks in the Turkish diplomatic corps and all the people in Flynn intelligence group, seem to be the people on the other side. Seem to be the people who, once it gets there, then, you know, they fly the last mile. Again, we're dealing with the son-in-law of Erdogan. Son-in-law of Erdogan, he's the energy and oil minister, the natural gas minister. We're also dealing with the foreign minister, MC, and the other key person in the group is a Ukrainian weapons dealer called Korkmaz. It's quite a crew. It looks a lot more like a covert weapons shipping crew than it does a group that's going to make a movie. As a matter of fact, the only people that have made a movie as far as Flynn Intel Group is concerned, remember there's 3 branches of Flynn Intel Group, and 2 of them we've just talked about testifying. The only part of Flynn Intel Group is White Canvas. It's the people that came over from White Canvas and are renting them office space. The only people who really do info ops are Iodonacy and Tim Newberry, who may testify later today. Who knows? He's on the defense's list to be presented, and I'll probably be able to go back up and check to see if he's presenting. But those are the only 2 guys that really are doing info ops over at White Canvas. Everybody else is this: Navy logistics, covert shipments, diplomatic containers, cover stories, DIA cover stories, cover service officers, right? That's what the metadata screams. Now, if you add to the fact that Eclipse Aviation, I ran into the reporter for Epoch Times and he didn't know any of this stuff, so I gave it all to him, but he's not going to follow up. But Eclipse Aviation is a $1.5 billion spy plane developed by NASA to fly through NATO defenses, through NATO countries, sight unseen, or with a very small footprint, like a footprint of a small Cessna plane. It's actually a very big diplomatic jet. And trust me, there's ways of doing this with metamaterials and so forth, antenna technology and different avionic defeat, that you can make a big plane look small. You can make a big plane look small. That's what Flynn-Altepkin does. They're running the drugs from Turkey to Holland. They are going to Hoopdorf. The reason why Christopher Stevens is a pilot, again, don't forget the awesome duo of Christopher Stevens and Carter Page, the reason why they're flying between Holland and Luxembourg is the other part of the triangle, down to Incirklik. Again, it would be a C-130, wouldn't it, Brian Alfredo? The reason why they're flying that route is the drugs go in one direction and the weapons go in the other. Just like Mena Airport, just like Jeff Epstein used to do on the Ohio leg for Les Wexner to Columbus. I'm not saying he trained. I actually thought Jeff trained down in Tegucigalpa in Honduras, but we'll figure it out as this whole thing unfolds. But Epstein's airline, EA, Epstein Air, Evergreen Aviation, turns into Flynn-Altepkin Aviation or Eclipse Aviation, and that gets bought in about 2007. Now, where do they get all the money for these planes? Where do they get all the money? Well, it turns out they get them from the World Bank. I had the opportunity last night to interview somebody from the World Bank, a pretty high-level guy who had a lot of supervisors, a lot of engineers working for him. And it turns out that not only did Bijan Khan, you know that story, you know the Bijan Khan story about being at the World Bank. You know how he loaned the $6.3 billion for the Star reactor and the Aegean Sea. Yeah, George, we know all about that. You know about the $527 million loan to Silkway Airlines. Is that the aviation you're talking about, George? No, that's not the aviation I'm talking about. We know about all the money loaned to Kazakhstan to build railroads and mines and siphon off some of the money for mining equipment, Krupnik crushers. We know all about that. Tell us something we don't know, right? and I just got a message from Marc, so I'm coming down after this with Peter Duke. So I'll meet you down there, and we're going to go to the Country Inn and then go down to City Dock and maybe go to Latitude 38. Maybe go out on a cruise for the spa tour tonight, so we can go by the Roadhouse there on Spa Creek. So we'll see where Distribution Fuel Services is. Where would you get the distribution fuel for all these, Diplomat Fuel Services are? Where would you get the Diplomat fuel for all these planes that we're talking about? I wonder, you don't want to make a big footprint, you want zero footprint on your planes. I would buy my fuel from Diplomat Fuel Services if I was Flynn-Altepkin. But let's go back to the World Bank story. I interviewed this guy at the World Bank, and I said, you guys seem to be involved a lot in loaning money for nuclear installations. You guys really seem to like this Westinghouse AP1000. Oh man, he knew all about AP1000. Yeah, my teams, my engineers, were doing those all over the place. Middle East, we just did a big deal. I wonder if Altepkin, right, and Bijan Kian and Mike Flynn, the Flynn Intel group that's going around and making all these pitches for 45 different nuclear power plants, I wonder if they're using World Bank money. Because the guy I just interviewed last night at World Bank says you were. So maybe you are. I wonder if you're also using it for aviation. By the way, I also interviewed a nuclear fuel engineer from New Mexico, an inspector. He says, man, nuclear is the future. We need a national nuclear strategy. These coal-fired plants, there's so much work in getting the coal to prepare it and everything. Plus you have all the EPA. Gas is the future, man. You should see they could capture these off gases right when they're drilling. Then they could put it right into the LNG. They could ship it right out. They can do it underground pipeline. Duke Energy is his biggest customer. He seems to think you can do LNG ports underwater. He seems to think you can drill underwater and fill tankers at sea underwater like Idku. George Papadopoulos, Idku, in Egypt. He seems to think you could do that. But let's get back to the World Bank story. The World Bank story is a fun story because it's not only Bijan Kian making all these loans for nuclear power reactors. Hey, we need to help Saudi Arabia out. They're hurting for money. We'll get you a World Bank loan. Guess who else works for them? Flynn-Altepkin. Flynn-Altepkin worked for the World Bank. As a matter of fact, that's how Flynn-Altepkin, the other co-defendant, meets Bijan Kian in 2008. And what's the first transaction they do? I'll let the audience participate here. What's the first transaction they do? Think about it. It's Flynn-Altepkin, Epstein Aviation, Evergreen Aviation, giving some clues. Eclipse Aviation, $1.5 billion in NASA. Private DARPA? Has anybody ever said private DARPA before? Did I. O'Donoghue ever say it was a private DARPA? Flynn Intel Group was a private DARPA? Hey, I. O'Donoghue, how you doing, brother? Ray John with the Navy. First deal they do is for purchasing Eclipse Aviation. That would make sense to me. I asked the World Bank guy last night, do you ever do aviation deals? Oh yeah, we get involved in aviation deals all the time. I said, yeah, I remember Hillary had those World Bank loans for Boeing, get those Russians to buy the Boeing jets. I said, but it seems a little bit off, using World Bank money to help out a mega corporation like Boeing, a defense contractor like Boeing. Oh, he tells me, hey, no, competitive with that Airbus, Toulouse. We don't want to lose to Toulouse. Airbus is a tough competitor. I said, yeah, actually, I went to Toulouse and I talked to a plant manager at Airbus, and they talked about how much money they would give him if he'd come in on Saturdays and work. They talked to how much they give him 10,000 francs, or not francs, euros, to come in on the weekend to work. Or maybe it was 1,000 euros. I can't remember. It was like quadruple time to come in and run the plant in Toulouse. They had to go through they had to bring the fuselage in from England, and they had to go through this little town, and they had to close the streets to get the fuselage in to get to the Toulouse plant. So maybe this should be the World Bank trial, because everybody in it is making presentations and pitches for the World Bank, for the nuclear. We must have broken, yep, that's the attorney for, he's Flynn's attorney. So they must have adjourned. They probably stopped with Kelly. Probably didn't get quite done with Kelly. I don't think they got on to Newberry yet. But he's kind of the advisor to Flynn. So we'll see as everybody breaks. You'll see him come out. That's Bob Kelly right there, in the white. That's Bob Kelly right there, in the white. Bob Kelly is an interesting character as well. He says, how did you get to know Bijan Khan? Well, you know, I was building a hotel in Baghdad. I thought it was like out of Africa. How did you come to write this book, you know? Well, I had a farm in Africa at the foot of the Yangon Hills. How many friends do you have where you say, you know how I got to know Bijan Khan? I was building a hotel in Baghdad. I wonder if he knows Dick Cheney. I know he knows the Senate. I know he knows the Senate Intelligence Committee. He even knew it was the Senate Intelligence Committee before it was the Senate Select Intelligence Committee. So he's been there a while. He knows what he's talking about. And he's the FARA expert. He's the one who says, Bob Kelly is the one who says to Bijan Khan, yeah, you don't need to do that FARA. You're working for a private corporation in Holland that has a landing strip, Altepkin. I hope they're not using diplomat construction services and World Bank money to build landing strips and pipelines. He has you could ask him, he's got 3 CIA lawyer friends in this thing. He's on K Street still. So you can ask him about getting World Bank money. I hope they didn't use World Bank money to build the hotel in Baghdad. I certainly hope they didn't do that. But he's the one who says he started the company with 3 CIA lawyers. So this is great because you'll see everybody as they come out. You'll see everybody as come out. I think he's talking to, I don't know who he's talking to. It could be somebody from Flynn Intel Group. It's hard to say. So the other interesting thing, what else was interesting? He worked for Wilmer Hale. He also, when he filled out the form for the Lobby Disclosure Act, he said, hey, you don't need to do the FARA, you're a private corporation. He also represented, interestingly enough, the Japanese Auto Manufacturers Association, and then he also represented a large Japanese automaker, and then he represented the country of Mozambique, and also represented the country of South Africa. And what I've noticed a lot of these covert weapons shipment guys do is they are trade representatives for automobile associations. I guess it's because automobiles are heavy. And it makes sense. If you're shipping farm equipment or shipping automobiles, the shipments are heavy. So if your proxy is going to be, if you're going to represent somebody through a front organization, through a fig leaf, you pick companies that ship heavy stuff. Kind of makes sense to me. Be interesting to see the 2 other FARA. It would be interesting to see who in South Africa and who are his other partners. I'm saying Joe Colvin, got to be one of them. These guys are connected like this. These 2 guys are connected like this. Bob Kelly knows Capitol Hill. Joe Colvin knows Capitol Hill. Joe Colvin knows energy. He knows where every nuclear power plant is in the world. Could you see possibly that Joe Colvin might be friends with Bijan Khan? It's kind of like having your own private bank. All you got to do is say it's a competitive situation. Hey, I'm with the State Department. It's a competitive situation. Even the State Department folks say our job is to sell weapons and also promote American businesses. That's how you get ambassadors. Are the only reason you have an ambassador is to get meetings, to sell American stuff overseas. And America's biggest import is weapons. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing. But he's the one who explained you only need to do the Lobbying Disclosure Act for Flynn Intel Group rather than the FARA. He was talking about 44 Canal Street where I was last night, where I was filming. I think I filmed the Thomas Paine, please publish the Wiener and the Wiener video. Don't give Wiener a pass video. Don't give Schumer a pass. Tell us the Rhode Island kids said Wiener and so forth. So now let's talk about San Diego for a second, because that's where it gets fun. And more attorneys coming out here, so I'll mention who's in the trial and who isn't. So this is where it gets fun. Again, we're going to go to San Diego. our gal here who is, and I'll give him some privacy. Our gal here is from San Diego, talks about all these things being on the same block. General Dynamics, which has got a sister organization in, got beautiful hair, I'll show you. I'll cover his face, but he's got gorgeous hair. He's got General Dynamics, of course, is where you make electric boat. General Dynamics is been in our story. That's where the Rhode Island kid is from. Well, the sister company for Spa War is San Diego. I still think Carter Page was Spa War, but SAIC is also right next door to Spa War, right next door to Sempra Energy. Again, remember this Secret Service agent's wife, daughter who dies, also works for Sempra Energy. Those people that know how to trap the gas and ship the LNG, right? Right next to the Navy Special Warfare Center, right next to the Navy Hospital. San Diego's even better. I wish I could go to San Diego and could afford San Diego, but San Diego's even better in our story for putting everybody in our story. Oh, and by the way, Carter Page's General Atomics is there. Can you see why Carter Page would want an office? Can you see why, with all these shipments going around, these trigger reactors, all these things leaving, all these boats, you would want somebody there, at least with some desk space, with Carter Page. So I've got other folks, I need to be leaving soon for disembarkation here, but to me, it's a bunch of guys who know how to play the game in Washington. They know how to get the money, they know how to ship stuff covertly, they know how to hide the communications, they know how to do fig leaves, they know how to use proxies, and they're saying, you know what, we need to read all this stuff into the record, slap, wrist slap, and then seal all the records. We're gonna seal all the records. So I don't know what happened. I just see Mr. Kelly's done here. I probably adjourned for the day. So we don't, somebody says CNN. So I heard Trump said something about the seized oil tanker in the Gulf. They're trying to turn up the heat on Trump, either make him look like a coward or start the war. I think Trump's pretty smart about angling away from that. And we'll see how that happens. But again, we told you it was Kish Island. We told you it was Bob Levison. We told you it was Diplomatic Fuel Services. And we'll just let all this metadata kind of keep coming together and let the picture fill in for itself. I'm seeing, okay. Took down a drone, somebody said. Okay, well that was a long time ago they took down the drone. I'm talking about what happened today, which is I saw a note that Trump said, well, first Trump tweeted out maybe that he took down Ibrahim, so maybe he heard what I was saying about the port of Norfolk. I know that there was Ibrahim's brothers, this is the guy who did the Mumbai bombing, but he said a new person had been captured, so I don't know if Ibrahim was in that lot. I could die and go to heaven if that happened, because that means my mission here. That's how I started with Ibrahim, and that would be the bookend, because that's what I said was happening. Covert weapon shipments, Operation Cassandra, drugs in one direction, and weapons in the other. And everything we've learned here continues to support exactly what I'm saying. It's not what, again, I follow this up with interviews. I interviewed a guy with the World Bank last night. I'm not going to say exactly what his position, but he has engineers working for him. He talked at length about the Westinghouse P1000. He knew that Mitsubishi was in for half on a joint venture. Again, if I'm shipping components of the HP 1000, or I don't, for some reason I have trouble saying HP 1000 because I just think P1000. But anyway, if I'm shipping components and it's coming from Mitsubishi, Mitsubishi's doing part of it, and Westinghouse is doing part of it, or some Westinghouse knockoff is doing part of it, like Rosatom, which is, I think, really what's happening. You would have a trade association front. You'd have a trade association front. And what I like about Bob Kelly's testimony was he kind of threw it all out there and put a big smiley face on it. And yes, I have 3 CIA partners. And yes, I represent South Africa, Mozambique, 2 mining areas, and also Japan. And then really give a lot of detail on the part where you want the press to go around Japan. So do you think that's where, no. I'm going back to Joe Colvin in South Africa and see if you've ever worked with the World Bank. Because the Senate Intelligence Committee has to work with the World Bank. They have to make loans that banks that can't be made public. If you're going to try to affect diplomacy in South Africa, or let's say Mozambique, you have to hire somebody like Bob Kelly. You need a fig leaf. You need diplomatic freight services and fuel services, because you can't advertise that stuff. You can't go out to bid for that stuff. You have to ship it under the cover of a Japanese auto manufacturer and a, whatever. I don't know if Japan's making everything or not. It kind of reminds me of the old Mitsubishi bonds. At the end of the war, MacArthur, thanks for all the super chats. At the end of the war, there was all these worthless bonds from Mitsubishi. They made the zero, Tora. And the CIA bought up all the bonds. And with all the stolen gold, they just said, hey, why don't we just use these bonds with all the gold we got in Philippines? I believe that's what happened. So the CIA has used this sort of as dark money, these CIA Mitsubishi bonds. So I'm just wondering if when Mitsubishi bought out half of the bonds for Westinghouse, I'm wondering, as far as their nuclear services go, I'm wondering if they use the old bonds or not. These are the same bonds that Jason had a guy on from New Zealand that said he was a bond courier. And this is the same thing I think Altepkin does, because he like Zwan is the other guy in this little drama that was a bond courier. They would go between The Hague or Hoopdorf. They would go also to Luxembourg, where the NATO supply center is. This big C-130s then, Christopher Stevens flew a smaller plane, like an executive jet, like an Eclipse aviation type jet, to Luxembourg. Something happened there. I don't know if that was the bond flight or not. I don't know if Altepkin was a passenger or Zwan was a passenger or not, but it's covert action, dark money stuff. And then that kicked off or operationalized weapons to ship. And then they left the big house in Luxembourg, again, not too far from the general, so they could keep their eye on inventory. And then it went to Encirclic. From Encirclic, it was sort of stored. These weapons were stored. In the case of Zero Footprint, I won't do that one just yet. In the case of Libya, to do the buildup, the Big Iron buildup, thanks for all the super chat, the Big Iron buildup, you had Encirclic pilots. I can even tell you what aviation wing it was. I think it was a 665, but I'm not sure. But Tosh Plumley tells the story. It's the same group being used over and over again, the same group of C-130 pilots, and you stockpile. Then the special forces get there 6 months later, but there's a build-up period that you have in these. I think the wing is the 665, awfully close to 666. But it's a small group of people, the same people. Tosh Plumley did Fast and Furious. Tosh Plumley did Zero Footprint. Tosh Plumley was, saying, hey, C-130s are leaving every day for Syria from Libya with Christopher Stevens, right? Christopher Stevens is visited an hour before Christopher Stevens' death. He's visited by the Turkish foreign minister, setting him up, fixing him there for his assassination later that evening. Who else? Marc Turi. Marc Turi testified that to Catherine Herridge of Fox News that for Zero Footprint, he went to Bulgaria. He got the weapons at Arsenal Factory. It was mostly small arms. Flew to Tobruk, which is in the western side of Egypt. Then with mercenaries, picked up the Muslim Brotherhood guys that got recruited by Moaz Mustafa, and then did the Benghazi piece. For Tripoli, it was a much more military, with missile defense and all that sort of thing, a much more of a military target. Benghazi was more of a special forces thing, where they were sawing the legs on the chairs halfway and all the bridge trestles and so forth, the old OSS tricks. And then all at once took Benghazi. Well, Gaddafi always was going to go toward Tripoli anyway, and his main defensive forces were in Tripoli. That's where you needed the NATO bombing, right? That's where you needed the buildup. And that's what happened. I talked to a guy who was on one of the cruise missile frigates, and they said that they fired 6 during the launches for Libya. They went and fired every missile on their destroyer, went back to Crete or went back to Italy, filled up again, and they did that 6 times. That's what they were doing when they were hot and heavy in Libya. They just unloaded. I mean, man, if you were Cruising Associates, if you're Peter Strzok that day, you made some cash. He also was on the cruiser, and I won't say which one for national defense purposes, when Obama was meeting with Fidan. Fidan is going to be in this mix here with Erdogan, by the way, the head of intelligence for Turkey. And they were presenting to Fidan. Fidan was presenting the plan saying, hey, Ghouta was gassed. Now we had Aleppo gassed. Mr. President, you said if they crossed the red line, you would let the missiles fly. Because they wanted that pipeline. They wanted that pipeline through Syria. The Syria, what was it, Peace Commission that Moaz Mustafa ran, they wanted that pipeline. And Obama said no. Obama said, we know. We know that it was CIA that came down, that trained you guys north in Turkey. You came over, you fired the rounds, the chemical rounds, and you changed clothes. You fired them from a Club K type vehicle. And we're not doing that. But anyway, the guy I was talking to, the Navy guy said, we were like this on the button. We were ready to go. We had all the launch codes, everything ready to go. We could have fired at any time. So that's how close we came to the 1,000 missile strike, or more than, it would have been, I think at least 3,000 cruise missiles and a whole bunch of planes. He said the Russian Kuznetsov cruiser would go by all the time, that close where they had visual contact. Anyway, that's a war story. I don't want to talk about all the people I interview, but I do try to always do the background and get the, story from the military side and then the covert weapons side with ex-intel guys. And it is always a combination. That's the point I'm trying to make. There's conventional forces and then there's unconventional irregulars, if you will. And you need intelligence guys to do the cover operations for the irregulars, to gather intelligence, find and fix, and then hopefully you finish with conventional forces, right? But they have to be in communication. You have to have communication between those two. You have to have a virtual cloud. And in this story again, I asked the question. We have the virtual cloud provider called Virtru, V-I-R-T-R-U, which all the people in this story are using. Altepkin's using it, Bijan Kian's using it, Flynn is using it. Robert Kelly said he didn't use his Flynn Intel Group email, but everybody else is using it. Brian McCauley's using it. The other CIA guys, Elliot is using it. I can't remember the other guy's name right off the bat. They're all using this stuff. Again, if you're just doing an op-ed that you're going to print in the Hill, why all the secrecy? If you're just doing an op-ed that you're going to print in the Hill, why all the secrecy? Doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to leave it here. Thanks for the big super chats. I really appreciate it. It's been a great super chat day. It is costing me money to cover this trial, but I think America needs to know the backstory. And if people, no one's doing this research. I talked to who I thought was out in front, which was Epoch Times, and when I said, the ACU IP3 agreement, nope, don't know what that is. Alex Copson, head of ACU, Flynn texting him, we're good to go. As Flynn's walking down the carpet to do his inauguration speech. Title I, FISA, December 2015. Title III FISA, day after the election when Flynn publishes the op-ed. That allows physical search and surveillance. Nope. So anyway, there's just no one else providing the information, so I feel like I have to be here. We'll find out if the trial is going to go on. I have the feeling it is because my San Diego connection isn't here right now, but she provided a lot of really great information. She was saying, when she was watching the show 2 years ago, she said, yeah, you were talking a lot about Fethullah and drugs for weapons, and you interviewed a guy named John B. Wells, and you said that there was a shell organization that was shipping weapons in one direction and drugs in the other, and then something about Project Cassandra came in later, and you said a lot of the companies that like right on my street. You said General Dynamics, and then you said SAIC for Nellie Orr, and that guy who told Bill Binney that we can milk 9/11 for 20 years. That guy, I can't remember his name right now. Nellie Orr / Miter. They're on my street, and then General Atomics is on my street with Carter Page, and the General Atomics Trigo reactors and all their portable nuclear power systems. And then, yeah, the Navy hospital that you said, and then Carter Page's office is right in the middle of all of it, and General Dynamics is there. I can't remember. Spa War is right next door. I said, okay. I won't belabor this too much more, but stay close to the story. We'll cover it. Every day triggers. We get more evidence. We get more faces. We get more verification, which I love. But you know, I said, yeah, you know, actually, I didn't just stay on that story. I actually went to Detroit. I actually went to Muzaffar Awan, because Gulen can't speak English. I went to the key spokesman's house. And I stayed in Pontiac, Michigan when I did that John B. Wells interview, right next to the drug clinic, which was right next to the We Buy Gold and We Buy Weapons, right next to the pain clinic. And I said Muzaffar Awan was running a system of Awan doctors, fake doctors, that were dealing out of the back of these pain clinics. Again, I don't know if that's connected to Rahm Emanuel and Imran Awan with their drug factory in Pakistan. But again, I informed the guy from Epoch Times that the UN ODC, their drug commission, is the one that says 80% of the heroin's coming from Turkey. It's coming with these Saudi diplomats with these Austrian passports that are printed in Austria anyway, for, you know, Keon Epstein, or wait, how does it go? Keon Epstein? Is that what the name they used? Jeff taught people in Egypt. Somewhere near Cairo. He taught people in Kosovo to fly. He taught people in Tegucigalpa. That's how Jeff Epstein's a billionaire, because he's been at it a long time. And he teaches pilots, and those pilots teach pilots. And now Jeff's into the takings. Hey, you know, we got a lot of girls here that could be models, could be Victoria's Secret models. Les Wexner is really going to love this next load. See you later. I got some to drop off in Milan, some to drop off in Paris, some to drop off in London. And the ones I really like, I'll go to New York. And if they're keepers, prove that they're in terms of compromise, I'll take them down to the island as kind of the farm. That's the Jeff Epstein plan. When Jeff Epstein says, I'm loaning my plane to Bill Clinton to go to Africa in 2003, kind of. He's loaning it to Bill's friends who are flying it to conflict areas like the Congo and DRC and Kagame, especially in Rwanda. That's when Jeff loves his plane out to go to Africa. It's not to do an AIDS conference. It's to go to Kagame to fly people around Africa. The people who do that in Asia and the Middle East are the Pakistanis. Again, you'll see all this stuff come out in time. Okay, I'm gonna leave it right there. Peter Duke's coming. We're gonna have a great time down in Annapolis. Hopefully the Rodent House will come out and wave as we go by on the Spa Creek, the Miss Anne. He'll wave to us and say, hey, diplomatic fuel services. Do you need any diplomatic construction services? Diplomatic pipeline services? Diplomatic fuel services? Anything? So we'll talk to you later. I can't read the super chats, I'm sorry, and we'll see you all down in Annapolis.